Right through to four-line paragraph or before start this amazing video, tell in comment section where you're watching from. Tell any 3 cities from different countries. I love to hear how for these story go. The mountain held its breath at dawn. A cabin crouched low against the ribs of the ridge, smoke whispering from its crooked chimney as though afraid to rise too high. On the porch sat Silas Boone, a man carved by solitude, boots planted heavy on weathered planks, eyes fixed on the valley below where the world lived, but he did not. His beard was streaked with frost, his hands worn to leather, and his silence had grown into something that felt less like choice and more like fate. He had paid for someone to come, not a wife, not companionship, but a widow from town willing to cook and keep house through the winter. No tender words were asked, only silence and bread, clean floors, and the assurance that he would not starve alone. From far down the ridge, the stagecoach appeared, climbing the winding path with a sound like bones rattling in a coffin. Dust trailed behind it, rising like ghosts against the blue morning sky. Silas's jaw tightened. Whatever woman stepped down from that coach would share his walls for months. That was the bargain. He did not imagine anything more. When the wheels groaned to a halt before the porch, she stepped down. A young woman, though weariness had stolen the softness from her face. Her dress was calico, faded to the color of old flowers pressed too long in a Bible. A single suitcase hung in her hand, nearly too heavy for her frame. And beneath that dress, clear as daylight, the swell of pregnancy pressed against the fabric, a truth impossible to hide. Silas felt the air still. He had expected a sturdy cook, strong in arm and steady in back. Instead, here stood a widow carrying not only her own weight, but that of another life. The driver muttered her name before clicking the reins. Eleanor Hayes. Then the stage rolled away, leaving her standing small against the vastness of the mountain. Her eyes lifted, meeting his without apology, though they glimmered with the exhaustion of someone long accustomed to judgment. She adjusted her grip on the suitcase and said, voice quiet but steady, "Are you Mr. Boone?" Silas's first instinct was to tell her no, to send her back down the ridge, to remind her that he had not paid for weakness. His mouth opened, but the words stalled when he noticed the way her small, trembling hand rested protectively on her belly. Instead, his voice came out rough, almost unwilling. "Come inside." The cabin swallowed her whole. Its walls bore the scars of winters, its floor littered with dirt and ash. The air was thick with wood smoke, heavy with a silence that had grown more ghost than air. Eleanor set her suitcase down and, without being asked, began to tidy. Her movements were deliberate, though exhaustion bent her shoulders. She moved as someone who knew that to stop was to fall. Silas stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching with the irritation of a man who had prepared himself for one truth and been given another. At last he spoke. "I needed work, not trouble." She paused, turning to him, the fire of quiet pride flickering in her eyes. "Work I can do," she said. "Trouble, I've already lived." He said nothing more. That night, she curled on a straw mattress near the hearth, her body curled around the life within her, while the mountain groaned against the walls. She listened to the long silence of the cabin, wondering if perhaps this was the last place left for her in a world that had turned its back. Morning came gray and bitter. Eleanor rose before the light, rummaging through his meager stores. Beans, hard bread, coffee gone stale from neglect. With steady hands, she coaxed a meal from almost nothing. When Silas stepped in from the porch, the smell of food brushed against him like a forgotten memory. He sat without speaking. She did not ask if it pleased him. She simply placed the plate in front of him and took her own seat across the table, small and upright, as though the act of eating beside him was an agreement of sorts. Later, she struggled with firewood, lifting the axe with determination, though her body was unfit for the task. Her swollen belly pressed against the fabric of her dress with every swing. When the wood splintered awkwardly, nearly tumbling into her, Silas's hand shot out, steadying her. Without a word, he took the axe from her, his broad shoulders rising and falling as he split log after log, stacking them neat and precise. His silence was not kindness, but it was not cruelty either. Still, whispers reached the mountains. In town, tongues wagged. Martha Klein, sharp-eyed widow, was quick to speak her poison. She'll drag him down, just as she dragged her man to the grave, she told anyone who'd listen. Judge Whitcomb declared it improper, an unmarried man and a widow beneath one roof. The gossip crept upward like smoke, though Silas never repeated it. Eleanor felt it anyway, pressing against her chest, unseen but heavy. Days folded into one another. Snow began to lace the ground, the air sharpening with the promise of winter. And in small ways, a different rhythm began to take hold. One evening, Silas returned from his trap lines to find Eleanor bent over by lamplight, mending his torn coat with neat, careful stitches. She did not look up when he entered. She only hummed a soft hymn under her breath, the thread drawing in and out as though repairing cloth could also repair the silence. He stood watching longer than he meant to, something in his chest tightening. Another night, while beans bubbled on the fire, he noticed her setting aside half her portion before eating. Later, when she thought him not watching, she pressed a hand to her belly and whispered to the unborn child. Silas turned his eyes away, but the sound stayed with him, threading through his thoughts like a hymn he did not know the words to. Winter crept closer, each morning arriving in frost, each evening swallowed in darkness. The cabin grew smaller, but the silence between them changed its shape. No longer sharp as stone, it softened, became a quiet that felt almost like understanding. Silas still did not smile. Eleanor still carried the ache of shame heavy on her back. But somewhere in the hush of snow and firelight, their lives began to knit together in small, invisible ways. Not through declarations, not through sudden warmth, but through the grace of survival, through the steady passing of days where each learned to bear the other's presence without breaking. And in that long, cold silence, something unspoken began to grow. Snow buried the world in silence. Days folded into nights, and nights into days, until time itself seemed to vanish beneath the white weight of winter. The cabin became its own small world. The steady crack of kindling, the simmer of beans, the hush of two voices rarely spoken but felt all the same. Silas Boone, who once lived by solitude as if it were scripture, now found his days marked by the small sounds of another life. Eleanor's footsteps soft against the wood, her quiet humming, the whispered prayers she pressed against her child still unseen. But though the mountains guarded them, the town did not forget. Gossip clung like frost to every mention of their names. Martha Klein's tongue wagged sharp as an axe, carrying word from porch to porch that Eleanor Hayes had lost all shame, living under a man's roof without vows. Judge Whitcomb, stern as stone, declared that such an arrangement was improper and could not stand. The judgment rolled up the ridge like a cold wind, unseen yet felt. Eleanor heard it in her sleep, in the way her body curled against itself, as though shielding the child from words alone. Then came the night the mountain tested them. The wind howled through the cracks of the cabin, snow piling heavy against the door. Eleanor woke with a cry, her body seized in pain. Silas bolted upright, fear wrenching him from the warmth of habit. She gripped the edge of the bed, her face pale, breath breaking into ragged sobs. "It's too soon," she whispered, but the storm paid no mind to her pleading. Silas had faced bears, wolves, blizzards that could strip a man's soul clean, but nothing had ever hollowed him like the sight of Eleanor gasping in pain. He fell to his knees beside her, his rough hands trembling as they held hers. "Tell me what to do," he begged, his voice low, cracked open. She gave him what guidance she could through clenched teeth, her words swallowed by the roar of the storm. Hours stretched like years. Eleanor cried out, clutching at his hand, sweat pouring though the air was bitter cold. Silas steadied her through every wave, his heart slamming like a hammer against his ribs. At dawn, when the world was no more than pale light behind thick snow, a cry pierced the cabin, thin at first, then rising, fierce as life itself. A baby girl, small, fragile, wailing as though to declare her right to the world. Silas held her in his calloused hands, all breaking across his face like sunlight through storm clouds. Eleanor lay back, tears streaming, her body spent, her soul alight with relief. Silas looked from mother to child, and for the first time in years, perhaps in his whole life, he felt his chest ache with something gentler than survival. Weeks passed before Eleanor could walk into town, the child bundled against her chest. Silas went with her, carrying their list of supplies. The journey was quiet, the sleigh creaking over snow, but both knew what waited among the townsfolk. And indeed, as they entered the general store, eyes turned sharp. Martha Klein's lips curled like a blade. Judge Wickham's gaze was heavy, his words colder than the air outside. "This cannot continue, Boone. It is not fitting." Eleanor kept her head bowed, shame burning hot in her cheeks. She had carried so much already. The gossip, the judgment, the weight of being unwanted. To stand in the midst of it again was almost too much. She clutched the baby tighter, as if shielding her child from words could make them vanish. Silas felt it all pressing down, the sneers, the whispers, the contempt. For years he had kept a silence, believing it to be his shield. But that morning, in the store thick with watching eyes, his silence broke. One man muttered that the child would be a burden, a curse on any man fool enough to carry it. Silas turned then, his shadow filling the room. His broad hand came down gentle but firm on Eleanor's shoulder, the touch protective, anchoring. His voice, deep and steady as the mountain itself, cut through the room. "This woman kept me alive through winter," he said. "Her hands made bread where there was nothing. Her strength lit fire when the cold tried to take me. She's worth more than every word in this town." The store went quiet. Eleanor's eyes lifted at last, tears brimming, not of shame, but of something softer, something long denied, belonging. For the first time since her husband's grave had closed over her past, she felt seen not as a burden, but as a woman who mattered. They left with their supplies, the sleigh creaking beneath them as the road carried them back toward the mountain. Snow fell gentle this time, each flake catching the light like grace made visible. Eleanor wept softly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You didn't have to speak for me." Silas's hands tightened on the reins, his eyes fixed on the road. His words came slow, as though pulled from some hidden well within him. "I didn't pay for grace," he said, "but you gave it anyway." The baby slept between them, a bundle of warmth in the cold, her breath soft as prayer. Eleanor turned her gaze toward the mountains rising ahead, their peaks shining white against the sky. Beside her, Silas allowed himself something he had not in years, a smile. Small, cracked, but whole in its own way. And so the cabin in the ridge became more than a place of smoke and silence. It became a home carved out of scorn, out of loneliness, out of the long hush of winter. Two souls who had believed themselves ruined found instead the quiet work of healing, stitched together not by vows or declarations, but by survival, by small acts of grace, by a love that asked for nothing yet gave everything. And if you, listening now, carry shame like stones in your chest, remember this. Sometimes love does not come with thunder or fireworks, nor does it arrive in ways the world calls proper. Sometimes it comes in the hush of a storm, in a hand steadying yours when you are certain you cannot stand. And sometimes it comes in silence, teaching even the hardest of hearts how to soften, how to begin again.